My son's wife grabbed the turkey platter off the table and hurled it across the room at me on Christmas Day. It shattered against the wall 2 feet from my head. I sat there for a moment, looking at the gravy dripping down the wallpaper my late wife had picked out in 1987. Then I looked at my son. He was staring at his phone. I stood up slowly. My knees aren't what they used to be. Walked to the kitchen and called my brother. "It happened," I said. "Just like you said it would." "You ready?" he asked. "All ready," he asked. "All ready was," I said. "My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, and I own a 4-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, that my wife Joanne and I paid off completely in 2009. Joanne passed in 2019, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After she died, I rattled around that house alone for about a year. My son. I'll call him my son, because that's what he was to me for 34 years. Even if he forgot it, he called me one evening in the spring of 2020 and said he and his wife were struggling. The pandemic had hit his restaurant industry job hard. They were 3 months behind on rent in their apartment in Cincinnati. I told him to come home. I want to be clear about something. I did not just hand them a room. I sat down with both of them at the kitchen table and I laid out what I expected. I was not a landlord charging rent, but I was not running a hotel either. My son would help with yard maintenance and the gutters. His wife, I'll call her my daughter-in-law, though she never once acted like it, would help keep the common areas clean. We would eat dinner together on Sundays. Those were the only rules. 3 things. My daughter-in-law smiled and said that sounded very reasonable. That smile. I think about it now. The first 6 months were fine, not warm, but fine. My daughter-in-law kept to herself mostly. She worked remotely for some marketing company. My son got a new job managing a restaurant supply warehouse. Things seemed to stabilize. Then her parents started showing up, not for visits, for weekends, then for weeks at a time. Her mother slept in the guest room that had been Joanne's sewing room. Her father parked his truck in my driveway and left oil stains on the concrete. I didn't say anything the first time. I didn't say anything the second time either. But by October, they had basically moved into my house without anyone asking me a single word about it. I brought it up to my son one evening. Just the 2 of us, watching a game in the living room. "They're having some problems back home," he said. "It's just temporary." "Son, I need to know how temporary. I'm not running a boarding house." He nodded like he was listening. He was not listening. Her parents were still there at Thanksgiving. Her father sat at the head of my table where my father sat, where I watched my own children grow up. And he said grace like he owned the place. I watched my son look at his phone during grace. I watched my daughter-in-law serve her mother before she served me. I still didn't say anything. I was being patient. Joanne always said I was too patient. She was right. She was almost always right. The real trouble started in December. My neighbor Clifford. We'd been friends for 22 years. He retired from the post office and now he watches crime documentaries and tends his roses with equal devotion. He knocked on my door one afternoon and asked if I'd gotten my mail lately. I said I hadn't checked it in a couple days. He handed me a stack he'd picked up from my box. 3 pieces were from my bank. One was from a title company I did not recognize. I opened the bank letters first. The first was a notice about a home equity line of credit application submitted in my name. Application date, November 14th. Amount requested, $85,000. I had not applied for any home equity line of credit. I stood on my front porch reading that letter 3 times. Clifford was watching my face. He already knew something was wrong. He'd seen the return address. "You want to come inside?" I asked. We sat at the kitchen table and I opened all 4 pieces of mail. The title company letter was a preliminary inquiry regarding a refinance application on the property. my property, with my name on it and a signature that was almost mine, but not quite. I have a distinctive way of writing the loop on my last name initial. 30 years of signing engineering documents will do that to a man. Whoever forged my signature had gotten close. Not close enough. I did not panic. I want to be honest about that. Part of me wanted to. But I am an engineer. When a structure shows signs of failure, you don't run. You assess. You document. You plan. I called my brother that night. My brother is 62 and spent 20 years as a paralegal before he retired. He's not a lawyer, but he knows more about real estate law in Ohio than most lawyers I've met. When I told him what I'd found, he was quiet for a long time. "Have you touched anything in their room?" he asked. "No." "Don't." "Do you have a security camera on the front door?" I'd installed one after Joanne died. One of those video doorbells. My son's wife had complained it was invasive when I first got it. I thought that was an odd thing to say about a camera pointed at the street. "Yes," I said. "Go through the last 3 weeks of footage tonight. By yourself. Don't tell anyone you're doing it. And call your bank first thing tomorrow morning and freeze everything." I did exactly that. The doorbell footage showed my daughter-in-law leaving the house on November 13th, carrying a leather portfolio that I recognized. It had been in my home office closet. It was where I kept copies of the house deed, my insurance documents, and several years of tax returns. She came back 2 hours and 40 minutes later. She was not carrying the portfolio when she returned, on November 14th, the same day as the equity line application. A man I did not recognize came to the door. My daughter-in-law answered before he even knocked, like she'd been watching for him. They spoke for less than 5 minutes. She handed him an envelope. I called my brother back. "I need you to come up here," I said. "I'm already packing," he said. My brother arrived 2 days later. We spent an evening going through everything carefully and methodically. He had contacts. One of them was a private investigator he'd worked with years ago. A woman named, well, I'll call her my investigator, because she asked me to keep her name out of things. She was thorough and fast, and in 4 days she had confirmed what we suspected. My daughter-in-law had been working with a man, a notary who had lost his commission in Kentucky for document fraud and relocated to Ohio to forge my signature on financial applications. They had submitted the home equity application. They had submitted a preliminary refinance inquiry. There was also an attempt, which had not yet gone anywhere, to add a name to the deed. The goal, as far as my investigator could determine, was to drain equity from the house and funnel the money into an LLC that my daughter-in-law had quietly formed 3 months earlier. The LLC had 2 members, her and her mother. My son's name was not on it. When I found that out, I sat with it for a long time. I thought about my son as a little boy. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike in this same driveway, the one her father now left oil stains on. I thought about whether my son knew. I still don't have a complete answer to that question. But I know that when a man's wife is committing fraud against his father and his name is not on the escape plan, he is either complicit or expendable. Neither option is good. My brother and I brought everything to an attorney, a real estate and fraud attorney who my investigator recommended, on December 19th. She reviewed the documents and the footage and made several calls that afternoon. She told us that what had been done constituted attempted mortgage fraud and forgery, both of which are felonies in Ohio. She also discovered that the notary involved had an active warrant in Kentucky. "Do you want to press charges?" she asked me. "I want to protect my house," I said. "What does pressing charges accomplish toward that?" She smiled. "Everything," she said. She coordinated with the county sheriff's office. Because of the active warrant situation and the multi-state elements, a detective from the financial crimes unit got involved. The timeline they laid out was this. We would let Christmas proceed normally. We would not tip off anyone in the house. On Christmas Day, after the family gathered, law enforcement would come to the door. I agreed to the plan. I went home and I cooked. I want to tell you about Christmas Eve because people always skip over it in these kinds of stories and go straight to the confrontation. But Christmas Eve mattered to me. I made Joanne's sugar cookies, the ones with the almond extract and the buttercream that she made every year that my kids would decorate on Christmas Eve afternoon. I made them alone this year. I put on the Nat King Cole Christmas album she always played. I sat at the kitchen table rolling out dough and I talked to her a little. I told her what was happening. I told her I was sorry the house she loved had been used this way. My daughter-in-law came into the kitchen at some point and looked at the cookies. "Are those for tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She took one. She didn't ask. She just took one and walked back out. I looked at the empty space on the cooling rack and I thought, this is who she is. Everything she touches, she just takes. Christmas morning. My son's wife's parents were in the house. They had never left, not really. Her mother had been staying in the guest room since October. Her father came and went. He showed up that morning with a case of beer and the sense of ownership that made my jaw tighten. My daughter-in-law had been in a particular mood for about a week. Edgy. I think she was waiting for the bank's response to the equity application. I had quietly ensured that response was being delayed through my attorney. We sat down to eat around 2 in the afternoon. Her father sat at the head of the table again. I let it go. I had bigger concerns. The conversation turned, as these things sometimes do, to the house. Her mother started it. She made a comment, very casual, the way a skilled manipulator makes things sound casual, about how it would be more economical for everyone if the arrangement were made more formal. I didn't respond. She pressed a little harder, said something about, as long as we're all living here anyway. I said quietly, no one was invited to live here permanently. That was when my daughter-in-law turned to me. Her voice went from 0 to 100 in one sentence. She called me a miser. She said I was sitting on a house worth 3 times what I paid for it while her parents had nowhere to go. She said Joanne would have wanted her family taken care of, and that landed differently than she intended because she had never met Joanne and she had no right to put words in my wife's mouth. I said, "That's enough." She picked up the turkey platter, the ceramic one with the painted holly border that Joanne's mother had given us as a wedding gift, and she threw it at me. My son did not move. Her mother looked at the gravy on the wall and said, "Well." I stood up. I walked to the kitchen. I called my brother. "It happened," I said. "You ready?" "Already was." I went back to the dining room and I sat back down at the table. My daughter-in-law was shaking, with anger or fear. I couldn't tell. Her mother was cleaning up the platter pieces with a kind of deliberate calm that told me she'd seen her daughter do things like this before. My son was still on his phone. "I think we should all stay calm," I said. My daughter-in-law laughed. It was not a kind laugh. 18 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it. 2 sheriff's deputies and a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit. One of the deputies had paperwork. The detective had a very neutral expression and a folder. "Good afternoon," the detective said to me. "Is this a good time?" "Perfect time," I said, and I stepped aside to let them in. My daughter-in-law's face when she saw the uniforms, I will not pretend I felt nothing when I saw that. I am human. 34 years of trying to be a decent man and a fair father-in-law, and she had looked at my house and seen something to take. I felt something when I watched the deputies walk into my dining room. I am not going to call it satisfaction exactly. Relief, maybe. The relief of a man who had been patient for a long time and had finally been given permission to stop. The detective introduced herself to everyone at the table. She explained that she had some questions for my daughter-in-law regarding several financial applications submitted in my name. She said this very politely, very professionally. My daughter-in-law said she didn't know what they were talking about. The detective opened her folder. "This is a copy of a surveillance image from a UPS store on Morse Road," she said. "Dated November 13th. Is this you?" My daughter-in-law had taken my documents to a UPS store. The copy service there had a security camera. My investigator had gotten the footage. The notary was arrested at his apartment in Westerville that same afternoon based on the active Kentucky warrant and new Ohio charges. My daughter-in-law was taken in for questioning. Her mother, and I want to be precise here, her mother was not arrested that day because her name was on the LLC, but direct involvement in the forgery couldn't be established immediately. That came later. Her father stood up and said something about lawyers. The deputy near the door looked at him with tremendous patience and said, "Sir, you're welcome to call one." My son sat at that table after everyone else had cleared out. The deputies were gone. The detective was gone. His wife was in the back of a car. His mother-in-law was on her phone in the kitchen, and his father-in-law was pacing the driveway. And it was just me and my son at the dining room table with the gravy still on the wallpaper. He said, "Dad, I didn't know." I looked at him for a long time. "I want to believe that," I said. "I swear to you, I know what you're going to say," I said, "and I'm not ready to hear it tonight. Tonight I need you to understand what was almost done to this house, to this family, to everything your mother and I worked for." He was crying. My son, 34 years old, sitting at the table where he used to do homework, and he was crying. I did not stop him. He needed to feel it. "Where are you going to go?" he asked. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "This is my house." The weeks that followed were not simple. I won't pretend they were. My daughter-in-law retained an attorney and the process moved slowly, the way legal processes do. Her mother eventually returned to their home state. Her father left the same night of Christmas, which I think tells you something about the man's conscience, or lack of it. My son stayed. We talked carefully and not enough, and then more. I had him sit with my attorney and review every document so he could see with his own eyes what had been attempted. His name was not on the LLC. His name was not on any of the applications. Either she had protected him or she had left him behind. And I think he spent a long time trying to decide which one felt worse. The equity line application was declined and formally flagged as fraudulent. The preliminary refinance inquiry was cancelled. My attorney filed to have any liens or encumbrances removed, and the title was confirmed clean. The house is still mine. The notary pled guilty to forgery and fraud charges in both Ohio and Kentucky. My daughter-in-law's case was still pending when I'm telling you this, but the evidence was thorough and the outcome was not uncertain. I want to say something to anyone who finds themselves where I was, not the legal part. You can get an attorney for the legal part. I mean the personal part. The part where you sit alone in a kitchen on Christmas Eve rolling out your dead wife's sugar cookie recipe while the woman who tried to steal your house eats one off the cooling rack without asking. People will say you should have seen it coming. Maybe I should have. People will say you were too generous, too patient, too trusting. Maybe I was. Joanne would have said I was, and she would have said it with love, and she would have also said that being too trusting is not the worst thing a man can be. What I know is this: I raised a son in this house. I paid for this house with 30 years of waking up before 6 and driving to job sites and reviewing drainage reports and coming home to Joanne and dinner and the ordinary good life that ordinary people build when they work hard and keep their word. Nobody gets to take that. Not a forged signature on a bank application. Not a woman who looked at my home and saw a balance sheet. Not anyone. My brother came for New Year's. We sat on the back porch with the heat lamp going, and he brought a bottle of good bourbon, the kind Joanne always said was too expensive, and we watched the neighbors' fireworks go up over the rooftops. "You doing okay?" he asked. I thought about it, honestly. "I think so," I said. "Ask me in the spring." He poured 2 glasses. We didn't say anything for a while. The fireworks were red and gold over the dark Ohio sky, and my house was behind me, warm and lit and mine, and the wallpaper in the dining room still needed cleaning, but I'd get to it. I'd get to it. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened in my house over those months. Not the legal part, the human part. The part where a woman sat across from me at my own dinner table, smiled, and agreed to 3 simple rules she never had any intention of keeping. The part where my son watched it unfold and chose, for reasons I may never fully understand, to look at his phone. Here's what I keep coming back to. None of it happened overnight. It built slowly, the way structural damage does. A small crack that you don't address becomes a fracture. A fracture you ignore becomes a failure. I spent 31 years assessing structures for a living, and I still almost missed it in my own home. That tells me something about how much we want to believe the people we love, or the people we've chosen to extend love toward. My daughter-in-law made a calculation. She looked at a 67-year-old widower living alone in a paid-off house, and she saw a transaction, not a person. And I think that kind of thinking, treating other people's lives and labor as resources to be captured, always reveals itself eventually. Not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical ledger, but because people who operate that way cannot sustain the performance indefinitely. She got careless. She went to a UPS store with my documents, and she didn't think about the camera above the copy machine. She signed her name to an LLC and didn't think about what happened when discovery began. Greed makes people feel invincible right up until the moment it doesn't. What I'm more interested in, though, is what I could have done differently, not to protect the house, but to be a wiser man earlier. Wisdom isn't something you have, it's something you practice, like patience or sobriety. I practiced patience for too long and called it wisdom. There's a difference between being patient and being willfully blind, and I crossed that line somewhere around the 3rd month when her parents were still sleeping in my guest room, and I told myself it was temporary. I knew it wasn't. I just didn't want the confrontation. That's the thing I'd tell anyone who finds themselves where I was. Your discomfort with conflict is not a virtue. Letting things go when they shouldn't be let go is not kindness. It is avoidance, and avoidance has a bill that comes due. What saved me in the end was not cleverness. It was Clifford handing me my mail. It was my brother answering the phone on the 2nd ring. It was an investigator who was thorough, and the camera I'd installed 2 years ago that my daughter-in-law had called invasive. Preparation I'd made before I knew I'd need it kept me from losing everything my wife and I had spent a lifetime building. The wallpaper in my dining room still has a faint stain where the gravy hit it on Christmas Day. I've repainted around it twice. At some point I'll repaint the whole wall, and it'll be gone. But I'm not in a hurry. Some reminders are worth keeping. Joanne used to say that the house doesn't make the home, the people do. She was right, like she almost always was. The people who tried to take this house had no idea what it actually held. They saw square footage and equity. They didn't see 31 Christmas Eves, or a boy learning to ride a bike in the driveway, or the specific color of afternoon light through the kitchen window in late October. You can't forge a deed to any of that. It belongs to the people who lived it, and it still does.